lot of them I've never seen before. Here we have a map of the Vimy site. There's our visitor centre here, and we're going to go on a guided tour in a minute. Hopefully the guy will let me video it. We've got to meet at the Canadian flag, which is just about here. A lot of these mines along here were all dug out by British soldiers, ex-miners, etc. Manchester tunnel diggers, Notts Welsh miners. And these are actually all mine craters that you see there, so you can just show how many mines were let off in the area. Commons, Vernon, Devon, Albany, Edmonton, Wombat. And that shows you the underground trek to it. And there's your front line and the German lines in blue. Try not to go too fast, but there's our miners in a picture there. And what they were doing was not only making mines to go and blow up in the tunnels, but they were also doing counter mining to stop the Germans mining back and blowing up their own soldiers. They'd catch wind of them and blow like that. Say for instance they heard a tunnel coming the opposite way, they'd put explosive in and blow it. And an air pipe on that one. I'm going to cut off and showing you some front line again. It's a hell of a lot of people visiting today. I've got hiccups. So, I'm just going to sign off now because we're going to see if the guy will be kind enough to let us film the tour. Got the Canadian flag flying at half mast in respect of Queen Elizabeth II. Pardon? Do you want to be famous? There's an aerial view of it at the time. No man's land in between. And I believe that is that in front of us. Preserved trenches. And we've got a tunnel entrance there. Obviously not as nice as that during the war, but I want you to find his name on the memorial. That as well. You know, at Beaumont, I found it weird how the Germans had their back to that trench that just disappeared,
To the ravine.
and they could never get them back. You know what I mean? It was crazy.
Yeah, and the ravine is like,
Yeah.
It was very it's not very wide, but it's very long, which made it so that the artillery pieces of the Allies was very difficult to hit, because if they hit a little bit too far or a little bit too short, it would completely miss it.
Yeah.
On top of that, a lot of that area was heavily fortified bunkers, so it would have to directly hit it. So
Yeah.
the chances of it directly hitting it, especially with the munitions crisis that they were experiencing with the low quality of shells going off, it made it very difficult to actually get anything done.
Yeah, just, you know, as a sort of a holding sort of position, you're just thinking, how did they hold that so long without getting pushed off of that
So
ridge?
the German forces during the First World War were extremely defense-oriented. They actually had a doctrine called the unyielding defense, because they had such a lack of manpower that they could not afford to contain any breakthroughs. They decided, we're just going to make this defense as impossible as possible, really, to take. So that's kind of why they had these enormous fortified areas, and they also had 2 years, if you're thinking of the Beaumont. 2 years to fortify the area for an attack. So I just wanted to stop here for a sec to ask you guys a question. Oh, you see all these beautiful trees here?
Yes.
Do you think these were here during the...
No, they weren't.
So the intense artillery bombardment in the years prior destroyed all plant life in the area. So why, my next question to you is, why were they planted after the battle? Why not just leave it kind of open as it was?
Maybe to protect the trench, you know, all the land as it was left.
So I guess like keeping it from eroding is a reason, not one of the two I'm looking for. So there's an official reason, and then there's more practical reason. The official reason is that it's made to resemble Canada. So if you've ever been to Canada, if you've ever seen Canada, you'll quickly notice that a lot of our land mass is forest. So this is why they were planted.
We do watch the Raccoon Whisperer though, don't we? Have you ever seen him?
No.
What?
Okay.
Good representation for your country.
Alright, sounds good. So the more practical reason is there's actually a lot of unexploded ordnance and corpses in the ground. With time, they actually have a tendency to rise out of the ground if there's not something particularly important.
Yeah.
So the root system of the trees that are planted here actually sort of keep everything kind of down low.
Wow. Would be the last reason I would have thought
Yeah.
of, but there you go.
Pretty interesting.
You would
Definitely, yeah.
Anything sort of buried below, but obviously there's got to be somewhere.
There's lots of missing in action, isn't there?
Yes.
Especially with the ground being churned up all the time.
Right.
There's a shell there. What size shell is that? Or was it?
A big one.
Yeah.
A big one.
Yes.
Wow.
Would have been one of the bigger guns.
Yeah, howitzer or whatever.
Doesn't look like it should be real.
Well,
Oh, they're bigger than that.
But don't quote me on this. Those are recreation. I believe we do actually have actual shells. These ones they look like they're kind of like painted cement or something. I don't believe this is an actual shell.
Representation.
Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the trenches before we actually hit on to the tunnels themselves. So if you look to my right over here, into the forest, you can see a trench leading into the
I'll
forest.
just step up on there.
Yeah, you can if you want. Be careful.
Yeah.
So that was the Canadian frontline trench. So this is where most of the combat would be happening, where troops would prepare to go over the top, and where the largest concentration of infantry would be just before an attack is launched. On my left, over here, there is another trench. This is a communication trench. So you might be able to notice that it is actually perpendicular to the frontline trench. And the reason for this is that each dotted line always had at least 3 trenches. So there was in front, there was the frontline trench, yes. then behind that there was the support trench, and then in the last position there was the reserve trench. So as the name suggests, the reserve trench helped the reserves of infantry who would reinforce the front line as so why is the communications trench perpendicular to that? It's because if you imagine the 3 main lines to run horizontally, then in order to get from one trench to the other, the communication trenches would run vertically to connect them. It was quite dangerous to walk over top of the trenches, so in order to get from one to the other, you always had to be within another one. So the communication trenches did serve to transport men, but they also served to house telephone wires. However, these telephone wires were still easily destroyed by any artillery or machine gun fire, so there were 2 other methods of communication for redundancy purposes. To make sure that the messages got where they needed to go. Otherwise, if a message didn't get to its officer, there could be some big issues. So the second means of communication were carrier pigeons. They were actually quite effective and knew where they had to go. However, for anyone who has done hunting or skeet shooting, you might imagine it's not that overly difficult to shoot them down.
No.
So the third means of communication was men. So there were actually messengers that would run around, and they would actually have a red armband on it. The reason for this was that the trenches were quite narrow, and there was a sort of priority of who had to yield to who. So the soldiers saw someone running around in the trenches with an armband, and they pushed themselves to the side to make way so they could get to where they were going on time, as unimpeded as possible. However, the Germans also knew this, so if they saw someone running around with an armband, they would very quickly become a target for snipers and machine guns.
Yeah. That's what my granddad did in the war.
So you might know this then, or you might not. The average lifespan of a messenger was about 14 days.
It wasn't a messenger, he was phones and carrier pigeons back to London, believe it or not.
He was probably like a signal,
even local.
signal unit or something.
He used
like
to
that
work
then.
for what they called the
14 days, yes. However,
General Post Office, as it was called back then.
however, many men, they still volunteered for this position because it came with a big increase in pay and reputation, and particularly here, it allowed them to spend a lot of their free time within the tunnels, which is a lot safer than being out of.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
Yes. So, I don't think you've seen the monument yet, but you'll see where basically as I mentioned, there were 4 Canadian divisions. The 4th Canadian Division would have advanced where the monument is, so way on my left. The 3rd would have been right where we're standing, they would have advanced towards the flag. The 2nd would have been on my right, and then further down there would have been the 1st Canadian. The axis of attack was kind of like this towards the Canadian flag. If you look behind me, on the hill over there, you can see way in the distance there's kind of an outline of a tower / castle. That is onsite divisional headquarters for the 1st Canadian. So you can see that it's not too close but not too far away. It's kind of a compromise because they wanted to be far enough away to be mostly at range of German artillery fire, but close enough to easily communicate with their men. So I believe some super heavy German guns can still fire that far, however it was more or less safe. Now we're going to head into the tunnel. So just some security concerns. The ceiling can be quite low at times, so keep an eye out for that. Don't want to conk your head or anything. The floor can be unequal, so watch out for that. As well, please use the stairs as we're heading down. Sorry, use the stairs. Use the ramp as we're using the stairs. And then I'll just ask the last person in line to please close the door.
Okay. That'll be you.
Ryan, I called my daughter.
You okay?
In my own time, I'm okay.
Yeah. And my own granddad, he got gassed at Eep, and
Oh, boy.
they moved him to India.
Okay. To recover or just?
Yeah, to recover.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know why they would.
We don't know why, because, you know, halfway around the world, it's not like they didn't have
Yeah.
hospitals. Okay. Okay. You think this is all hand dug as well?
Indeed. Just making sure that. There you go.
That's okay, we'll wait down the bottom.
That's fine.
Follow the footsteps of the Canadian soldiers as they move towards the attack.
I am fine, I'm just slow, sorry.
That's okay. Last tour of the day for me, so I could take
Right.
a little bit of
You're
time.
not rushing anyway.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
You would have thought it would have been deeper than this though, wouldn't you?
So there are actual sections that were deeper.
Yeah.
I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for the most part, the depth of this tunnel was sufficient for most artillery strikes. Only the heaviest shell directly positioned where it really caused any damage.
And I take it they had wood.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can't ever imagine anybody being down here, can
Yes.
hard to believe.
Right.
Where was the city we went to where it's got, they basically were all hiding below and they turned it into a museum, didn't they?
I don't know, but when we came out in the tunnel,
Yeah,
in
and
the
we came out in the
street,
middle of the
we
street.
didn't even know where we were.
Oh.
But
Okay.
it was somewhere in France.
Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
and not far from
Well,
here.
anyways, welcome. This is the Grange subway system. This is part of 13 tunnels that were dug in Vimy Ridge in preparation for the assault. Altogether, all the tunnels equal to about 10 kilometers in length. Right now, we are currently 8 meters underground, and it actually stays 8 degrees Celsius year round. So in the summer, it was air conditioning,
It was
and during the
beautiful.
winter, it was heating.
Yes.
Yeah,
So, as you had observed, this is not completely original. It had to be reinforced to modern safety standards. So, these concrete reinforcements were added afterwards, as well as the metal grates you see on top. It was also increased in both the width and in height.
Gosh.
So, if you'll permit me, for a few seconds, I would like to turn the lights off,
Yeah.
so you can get an idea of the kind of luminosity they were working with.
Yes.
No
You see
problem.
that yellow light on the ceiling over there?
yes.
That is a replica of the same kind of bulbs and lighting that they were working with. So shut it off for a few seconds and you can get an idea of how dark it was.
Oh, good grief.
Yes. So a lot of people ask me, did they have flashlights? They existed at the time, but they're too expensive to issue to each soldier and generally out of reach for the individual soldier to buy themselves.
Yeah.
Now they were not allowed oil lamps down here, but they were allowed to smoke, so go figure.
Sounds crazy,
So there's
doesn't
a lot
it?
of smoke, and they would actually have air pumps to bring in fresh air.
Yeah.
But if they needed to write a letter, if they needed to do something kind of small, they would have matches on them to, do that with. So just imagine you're getting ready for a battle. It's dark, you can't see anything. You'd be shoulder to shoulder. You'd be holding the other person's shoulder in front of you.
So how far apart would these lamps be then? How many?
We'll cross one just down there, so you can kind of get an idea of.
If you want to lead the way.
Yeah, go ahead.
You go.
So,
A tight squeeze, definitely.
So these rocks here, this is actually flint.
Yeah. That's all you want to be hitting, isn't it? And if you've got any sort of gas down here, you blow yourself up. Did they not put any railway tracks down?
No. I know they were used during the war, but I'm not sure if they were used in
The song,
any of the
they used
tunnels,
them in the
but
song.
these ones specifically, I'm fairly certain they were not used. No. So a lot of people have this idea that war is 24/7 combat, which is not the case.
No.
There was a lot of downtime, and on the front line there was not a lot to do during this downtime. So just like today, what do young men do when they have nothing to do? They would graffiti.
Yes.
So they'd come down here, they take their knives out, their bayonets, and they would carve into the walls. Unfortunately, we have no way of determining which ones are original or not, because during the 1950s and 60s, this area was open to the general public.
Right.
So the French teenagers would likewise come down here
Yeah.
and add their piece to the wall
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah.
During the Second World War, when the Germans were here, once again, they'd come down here, examine something, think it was cool, carve it out, and take it home as a souvenir. Now, away on the other side that I can't show you, unfortunately,
Yeah.
there is a maple leaf carved into the wall with a battalion signature and date. We believe it's original, but we just can't be 100% sure. So we'll continue.
Yeah.
There's another light here, and I believe there was one back there as well. So kind of gives you an idea of how much there was spaced out.
I'm actually going to take down the National Grid, aren't they?
No. That's actually stopped a question from myself because I couldn't see anything going front line.
Yes. So this is the Black Watch Tunnel. This is the tunnel that we have in the tunnel that is the closest to the original. So you can see that the reinforcements are still wood and not concrete, and the dimensions, especially a little bit further down, are a lot narrower as well.
Yeah.
So this giant hole is right here in the middle. This is for drainage purposes.
Right.
Because when it rained above, it would rain downstairs as well.
Yeah, it leaked through.
So it was not a toilet. It was
No.
just for wider drainage. So right in the corner here, you'll see two replicas of a pick and shovel. This is the sort of tunnel, the tools that they would have used to mine to dig here. It's all dug completely by hand and all
Yeah.
as well. The reason for this was that the German engineers would also be listening for any digging going on. Now, if they discovered any digging going on, they would attempt to dig their own tunnels underneath these ones and use explosives to collapse. So, can anyone tell me what kind of stone this is?
Granite?
No. I'll
Limestone?
give you an idea or a hint. You would use it as a child to draw on a road.
Chalk?
Exactly, so it's chalk. So chalk is very soft, which is why this is one of the reasons that there were so many tunnels dug in the area. You could almost like scrape it off with your hand, right? And so it was also much lighter at the time. It was more pure white. So what this meant was that there's a little bit more luminosity in here, and it also meant that they had to take all this rock out and dump it somewhere. Problem was that there would be German reconnaissance aircraft flying overhead, and if they saw this large pile of white rock, then they could easily understand that there was tunnels being dug in the area. So in order to keep this from happening, they would actually mix the chalk with bags of sand before they would dump it. So that would kind of camouflage a little bit more.
So is this rock treated in any way to keep
No.
it? No, just
All
as it
completely
is.
natural. Yep.
You can feel the water in it though. When it's cold.
Yep. Yep. So it would have been completely the same as it was in the tunnels originally. It's just that it's been increasing width.
Yeah.
And so one of the uses of the tunnels, so there were actual permanent rooms here that would hold, there would be headquarters, there would be communications rooms, barracks, officers' mess, things like that. But the main purpose of these tunnels was to bring troops back and forth from the front line, from the rear to the front line in preparation for an attack. So the thing is, they would not create the exits facing these front lines right away, because obviously the Germans would be like, why are there holes here? So they kept them sealed until the battle would start. What they did was they'd pack it full of explosives, and then before the battle would start, set those explosives off, instantly creates an exit, and then all this infantry would rush out in preparation for the attack.
And there's quite a few around here looking on the map.
Yes.
Longfellow's one of them,
And so to get the infantry ready, they would sometimes, not sure how often, but sometimes they would give them shots of rum or whiskey to get a little bit of liquid courage before an attack started. Yes. So we're actually going to head on out right now, so
yeah.
We'll have a little bit more about the battle itself.
That's a dead end. Nowadays, anyway. Now you know why I was never a miner. Bash me head all the time. It's okay. It does feel really damp, doesn't it?
Yes.
Get out of your way.
Sorry.
That's all good.
He's not even feel like me. I have balance issues as well. Thank you.
I'd be no good, would I?
So, a little bit about the trenches themselves.
Yeah.
So, the first thing I wanted to ask you, is there anything you noticed about the shape of this trench, how it was created? Yes, so it zigzags or curves or however you would like to refer to it. Can anyone tell me a reason for this?
Blast.
No, it's not because of the alcohol shots they had in the
People
tunnels.
behind you.
So, yes, as you said, risk for blast waves. That was one of the reasons. If an artillery shell landed within the trench, it would be localized.
Yeah.
So depending on how big the shell was, if you're on the other side of a curve, you'd be more or less safe from this explosion. Another reason was that if a German soldier managed to get inside the trench, if it was straight, all they had to do was aim their rifle down the line and they could get to as many people as they could see. So this kind of prevented that.
Yeah. And they'd be looking forward, not sideward, wouldn't they?
So, a little bit of a quiz for you guys. So, I told you guys back there was the frontline trench. So, that was the frontline trench. Behind them, towards Mons to the west, was a support and then the reserve trenches. If this is not a German trench, what kind of trench is it? I have not spoken about it yet. Just want to see if you can guess what it is, what its purpose was.
If it was a Nazi Germany one.
So it was not a German trench.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, what would the Nazi
Wasn't it a German
Germans be
trench?
doing in here?
The Canadian front line was over
Well, this
there.
would be a frontline trench, wouldn't it?
Not quite. So another hint, it was very close
So
to
it'd be a reserve.
German trenches. So it was actually a observation trench.
Right.
Canadian observation trench. It would be lightly manned, and there'd only be a few soldiers every dozen meters or so.
Is this the height that they would have been?
So usually, when we talk about the trenches, we say they've been eroded quite a lot. Usually, both sides, the height would be about 12 meters, or sorry, 12 meters, 2 meters in height, and they've eroded over time. However, I believe, but don't quote me on it, is that this trench is very close to the original because that hill would have served as a form of protection, so that it didn't need to be as high as other trenches. So this was just a trench that was made to observe the German forces, to gain intelligence on them. They would be very quiet. You could not smoke. You could not make a lot of noise. Other than that, the trench itself would have looked a little bit different at the time. So they wouldn't have had this nice gravel that we're here right now.
Duck
It would have been
boards.
these wooden duck boards, like
Yeah.
kind of like you see behind me, but not concrete.
Yeah.
However, it was so deep and a lot of water would have come up to your knees, which led to a lot of problems with trench foot, a lot of infections, a lot of amputations
Yeah.
that had to happen as a result. other than that, even though they shave their beards, their hair, there's a big problem with the lice in the trenches. So their uniform was wool. As a result, the lice would actually permeate throughout their uniforms. There's stories of men who would take lighters or matches, run it along their arm, and all these bugs would just fall out. So it's quite
Brilliant, yeah.
disgusting.
That's all you need.
It's a big irritant for them. And many men would write home about this was almost the largest cause of misery they had to deal with. There was also a big problem with the rats, and so they would actually start breeding cats as a form of solution. However, there were first-hand accounts that these rats would sometimes grow so large, and even the cats would refuse to catch them.
Oh, good grief.
So it actually turned into a bit of a game to pass the time for morale. They'd see, which soldier can get the most amount of rats, which could get the biggest rat as well.
Gosh, what an entertainment.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the battle itself started on April 12th, 1917. April 9th, 1917, and ended on April 12th, 1917. So before I start talking about that, let's make our way up the trenches to no man's land, and we'll talk a little bit more about the battle.
Are you all right, too?
Yeah.
Well, they got to washing their feet there, and
Yeah, get holes.
Why are these bits?
So those are just where there would have been dugouts. It's just that they weren't able to preserve them. So
Right.
it's just to give you an idea of where the locations would have been for the dugouts.
they've got to rest in places like that when they were standing down. Another one there. Nice for little men.
Not really much to keep you safe.
No.
But we're all of these trees planted
Yeah.
afterwards.
All these trees were planted afterwards. So
Is that
welcome
one of
to
the craters?
No
Yeah.
Man's Land.
Yeah.
This is indeed an example of one of the underground craters as a result of the underground explosions that I was referring to earlier. However, this particular crater was blown before this battle. This was actually blown in one of the attempts I was talking about earlier from one of the other nations that attempted to take the ridge but were just pushed off. This was blown during a French attempt to hold the ridge. So that's the Canadian observation trench. Well,
Yeah.
which one is that?
German.
Exactly. So I believe this is the closest that the trenches would have ever been on the entire Western Front. Usually, no man's land was, hundreds of meters in width. From trench to trench, right here is about 20 meters. However, no, it was not close enough to the lob grenades from one to the other.
No.
There was not a constant, handball fight of grenades. While they were modeled usually after baseball for men to because they were already, they played baseball, so then you had to throw it. They were too heavy to throw that far. If I had to make an estimate, it might have been about halfway.
Right, which is still a fair distance.
Yes, about 10 meters.
Definitely.
So the battle itself, as I had mentioned earlier, started on the 9th of April 1917 and ended on the 12th of April 1917. So the first 3 Canadian divisions were successful in reaching their objective by the end of the 9th. So not even a full day. Due to all their preparation and their tactics, it was relatively successful. Good?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm fine. Sorry, yes. Don't worry about me. I've learned to live with this now,
Okay.
so yeah, I'm fine.
However, the 4th Division took until the end of the 12th day. The 4th Division, as I
4th
mentioned
Division
earlier,
on that.
no, they were where the monument is, so
Right.
that way. Now, the reason for this was that there was a German fortified position called the Pimple, which was past the monument. This fortified position had a lot of machine guns and artillery.
Yeah.
Now, during the week of suffering, which is what the Germans called the Canadian and British artillery bombardment, the week prior to the assault beginning, they the artillery bombardment failed to adequately destroy enough of this fortified position.
Familiar story.
Right. So this, not only due to the Pimple, but the area the fort was moving up was also the steepest part of the entire ridge, and so it was only when the first 3 divisions achieved their objective were they then able to pivot and reinforce the 4th in order to take finally Hill 145, which is where our monument lays today.
Right.
So,
Fantastic.
I don't want to say. So during the Battle of the Somme, which is where Beaumont is, I'm not sure how much you know about the Battle of the Somme, but it was quite a huge failure. It was,
Yes.
honestly, you want to kind of say it was a catastrophic failure, colossal failure. 1.3 million dead, only on the British and Allied side, not even including the Germans, just not on that. However, it is one thing to look at as a silver lining. A lot of lessons that were learned there were then applied successfully here. So one of the 2 things that the Canadians would have used differently was small unit tactics. So during the Battle of the Somme, surprisingly, they were still using almost Napoleonic walking styles. They were more or less shoulder to shoulder and literally walking towards the enemy full upright like this.
Yeah.
So when the Canadians fought here, I'm not sure if they invented it, but they definitely used it here instead of the Napoleonic kind of battle walking. They said, this is not working, we're going to use fire teams. Fire teams are teams of 2 to 4 men, and basically they would do this kind of leapfrogging where 2 men would fire at the German trenches to keep their heads down, while the other 2 would advance. So you had kind of a lot of these fire teams moving up as well.
What my father told me, what his dad had told him, the youngsters would be like what you were describing, because that's what's doctrinated into them. Stand up, we destroyed it all, walk. The older fellas are down, crawling along. And he said you could spot a newbie, literally, because they'd be upright. Some of them have their rifles over their shoulder.
Oh wow, yeah.
Going to play cricket, that was what their famous thing with the Somme is, isn't it? He bats a cricket ball off into the no man's land like they're just going to have a day out. Wrong.
Then 2 other things that were introduced here was the introduction of maps. So they realized a big failure point of the Battle of the Somme was the breakdown in communications. So what happens when the NCOs die? What happens when the sergeants are incapacitated, the officers are incapacitated? They said the soldiers don't know what's going on, they don't know where to go, they don't know where they are. So all of a sudden they issued over 40,000 maps during this battle alone to all of the men to make sure that everyone knew what was going on, even if their leadership was not able to be contacted, had fell already. They also had a lot of preparation, so there's actually model trenches made they would use to practice over and over and over again. The third thing that they would have introduced here was the creeping barrage. So back in the Battle of the Somme, they would use something called a rolling barrage. What this was is that they didn't have smoke shells at the time, at least they weren't being used. So what they would do instead, to hide the advance of the infantry from the German trenches, they would make this kind of continuous wall of artillery fire. So when the shell exploded, it put up dirt, it put up debris and smoke as well, and so they would use this to kind of cover their advance. The problem was that during the Somme, this rolling barrage had only 1 line of artillery was being used for this. So eventually the infantry would get too close to this wall, they'd have to stop firing, align their guns, and start firing again further ahead. The problem though is while they were realigning their guns, they'd be completely visible to the German trenches. So what they did now, during the Battle of Vimy, for example, is they had two lines of artillery. So while one of them was firing, the other one was realigning. So before their first line of artillery would stop firing to realign, the second one would already start shooting ahead. So there was this continuous line of artillery fire.
Yeah.
They would also have practiced a lot synchronizing the infantry with the artillery to make sure that they were moving at the same kind of pace. However, there were still some errors with this. There was reports that one particular battery of artillery on the Battle of Vimy Ridge was kept firing too short. This led to almost an entire platoon of Canadian soldiers being killed by friendly fire. There's a cemetery close to here that has an entire road dedicated just to one platoon. They were almost all killed in the same instance.
Horrible.
However, in the end, due to these lessons learned and to the experiences of the armies prior to this, the Canadians were successful in capturing the hill, but also in defending it against subsequent German counterattacks. So even though the battle ended on the 12th, it wasn't really over, just because they kept getting attacked. They were just very successful in defending against these German counterattacks.
Yeah.
So all in all, there was about 3,000 Canadian deaths that day, which remains the most costly Canadian battle in all of our history. About 60,000 men fell during the Great War in total on the Canadian side, and our monument has 11,284 about names on it. These are all the names of men who died during the Great War who we don't know where they lay. Possible they're in the ground, it's possible they are in an unmarked grave as well.
Yeah.
So a little tidbit about that, however, is that there's actually less people lost now than there is on the monument, because we have a casualty identification program, which they try their best to identify unknown graves as well as bodies that are found in the area, and so they would actually sometimes belong to a name that's inscribed on the monument, but we leave it there. I know at CFL, the British, they actually will put a line to strike it out when they're found, but we leave it there because we believe it's part of their history that they were lost and then found.
Yeah, and it's a nicer touch, isn't it? It's more human touch.
Well, I mean, we all have our traditions, so I can't say one's better than the other, but so that is it for my tour. So
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it. If
I
you have
did.
any questions, don't hesitate.
No,
I
you've
just
been
wanna
great.
know, was that something that was actually found in the ground that they...
This
Yeah.
here? No, I'm not entirely sure. We didn't talk about it, but I'm
Just
fairly
seems-
certain these are not real shells.
Yeah.
To me, what it looks like is concrete.
One's
that
got a
was
fuse
painted.
as we come up,
Yeah.
but that might be just a fuse on
Just
top of
wondered
concrete.
if it was something
Yeah.
that they found in that spot and then replicated it by sort of marking it.
If you go into the German trenches, which are just over here, if you walk around inside them, you'll come up. I believe there is a Minenwerfer, which is the German name for a mortar.
Yeah.
That's at the end of the German trenches. So there's actually a few guns laying around here.
There was one as we came up
yes,
as well.
Yes, that's just a regular
Yeah.
small caliber mortar.
Well, I'm glad I made the effort, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and your visit.
Thank you. We'll
So much.
see you before we go.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
Rosie.
care.
Bye.
You just see how deep that is.
Yeah, very deep. I'm not looking back, I won't look further.
We'll just walk to that trench there,
The,
F,
feet are like
because there. Look at them all. One there, one there, one there.
ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah. Crater line. And don't touch that.
I know.
Electric fence. So you got crater there, crater here, crater there, crater after crater. Yeah. Yeah. And then crossfire from these turrets. And again, you've got trenches there going across to literally the brow of that hill where my finger is now, to there. As the chap said, they were 20 metres apart, and it goes on and on and on. Yeah. See the mortar over there on the right.